Welcome back to the third episode of Moving Grief with Jason and Heather. I'm Heather Stang.
And I'm Jason Wendroff-Rawnicki, and I'm really excited to be having this third episode because it's exciting for me. I love our conversations, and I love the way we just play off of one another and give ourselves space to really be the true beings that we are.
I always learn something from you, whether
I learned
it's professional or about your personal life. I think one of our missions for you listeners is not just to be the talking heads that have read a bunch of books, but to be your companions on this journey and share a little bit about our own.
Yeah, and giving you the tools and strategies that we've done ourselves to kind of get us to where we are so that you can then learn to get to where you need to be or you want to be. So one of the narratives that I realized that existed way before my sister even passed was that I've been conditioned to be the loser, just period. Like the loser. When I was in grammar school, I used to get picked on all the time because I was the heavy kid that was not athletic, that didn't really care too much about sports. So the kids used to always pick on me and they used to call me a loser. And it wasn't until I started to really explore that narrative that I realized that even the loss of my sister fit into that loser narrative because I lost her at a young age. I was, 26 years old. She was 24. And it was happened way before she passed, but it fit into that loser narrative. And also, like, I had a moment where my finances were I was really struggling financially. I lost my finances. I lost a bunch of relationships. I lost jobs and not being able to acknowledge it then, but acknowledging it now, that was part of that loser narrative that I used to tell myself. And so my job loss, and which then led to some financial troubles, and all of those things are all tied in together. And not realizing that in the beginning, and then as the narrative started to unwind and unfold, it's like, oh, right, how do I change this narrative? And so I've been working, even currently working right now, to go from that loser narrative to the champion narrative. And that takes a little bit of sculpting. It now takes also the naming of the things that make me a champion just as much as it is being that loser.
You have just hit on one of my favorite tools for navigating loss and reconnecting with self. So, first, I just want to acknowledge the little boy that felt like he was a loser and understand how, when your sister died, that reinforced that identity. And then the
100%.
financial loss, the job loss, it's this constant reinforcing to the point where
Yeah.
you believe this is who I am. That must have
Yeah.
hurt.
Well, 100%. And that's the identity, right? Like, that's the identity that you were talking about just a few moments ago, is everything was wrapped up in my identity. And the identity is just this certainty of who you are, right? Like, and a lot of people even identify with their own grief, that the grief is all that they are. And especially in the beginning, I know I did it as well. Like, oh my God, I'm bereaved, I'm a griever. And that, like, encompassed my whole identity. But then when I realized I was more than that, that there are all these other parts of me other than just being a griever or just being a loser or just being a champion, they're all integrated together. And so there are times, one of the tools that I use all the time is that I let my loser identity speak to my champion identity, and my champion identity speak to my loser, because they both have to exist. They're both in there. And I feel like we all have a certain conflict like that, right? Like, that's how it shows up for me. But we all have, like, one certain narrative that we've been living, and we can balance it out by its opposite. But they need to communicate with each other in order for for me specifically to be able to move forward. And then I have the choice of which voice I listen to.
And that's very non-dualistic. We often think that opposite things cannot coexist.
That's why I think also people get so wrapped up in the positive, like positive talk, which is important, but understanding that you can't have one without the other. So if you're saying like, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, and you're really not, your mind is calling BS on all of that. It's saying, okay, great, you're saying this, but that's not true. And when you realize, okay, I'm going to focus on the things that make me happy, but I'm also feeling sad too. And there can be a dialogue between the two. That's when it's like, okay, right, like maybe I'm not happy, maybe I'm just content, or maybe it's something else, not happiness. And so we got to take those little baby steps so that our mind doesn't call like BS on our belief systems, pretty much.
With a lot of my clients and with myself, I usually say to focus on maybe just feeling neutral at first,
Yeah.
because going from feeling sad and lonely and heartbroken to happy is just it's too quick of a journey, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so to just pause with, where in my life are things just neutral, maybe even
Yeah.
boring,
Yeah.
and then
Well,
work our way up.
yeah, and one of the tools, and this is a good tool that I could recommend for all of you that are actually feeling completely like crap and feeling completely derailed, is notice when something happens, how long it takes you to get regulated again, and then try to shorten that period of time. So if it takes you 6 or 7 days, which is not really uncommon in the beginning stages of grief, it could take, maybe weeks or sometimes even months, right? See if you could shorten that time a little bit. So if you know it's like a month or a week, let's say, just for simplicity's sake, if you know you get completely dysregulated for about a week, try to like be dysregulated for like maybe 5 days or 4 days, so that this way the time gets shorter, so that you can learn to kind of regulate yourself and give yourself that break, give yourself that leeway to shorten the time. And then eventually, it could happen within hours, if not minutes, because at this point, when I realize that I'm dysregulated, I'm like, okay, I acknowledge that, the awareness, right? The mindfulness, this is what I'm feeling. And then how do I make the choice and change it?
I can think of times in my life when I didn't even know I was dysregulated.
Right.
Like,
So that's why awareness is always just the first step, and everyone, says, oh, mindfulness, right? Like, yes, that mindfulness is great, but that's step number one. Then the steps after is how, once I've noticed what I'm feeling, once I'm mindful of what's happening, what can I do to have choice and agency to shift and change it?
and there are a million different ways that you can move towards a more regulated self. And that includes things like breath work, speaking
Mhm.
to yourself kindly, phoning a friend that will talk you down, petting your dog, having some tea,
Yep.
walking outside. There's no one right way to do that.
Yeah.
And it's normal in the early period of grief, whether it's over the death or over a secondary loss, for you to get hit with these waves over and over again. We'll use your example, when you felt like I'm a loser again. That probably didn't just happen once and then you
No.
regulated yourself and the box is
Yeah.
checked and you never feel it again. It keeps coming. But I like your suggestion about bringing awareness to it, so you can say, oh, I notice I've been out of sorts for 5 days or for 2 hours, whatever it is for you in that moment. And what can I do right now? And it does, when you bring that mindfulness to watching yourself, to witnessing yourself, not in a critical way or a judging way, but in a really kind way,
Mm.
to say, can I shorten the cycle? And that helps stop habituation, because habituation is something we all do. We have habitual responses that come from deep in our subconscious mind. And we need to learn how to interrupt that habituation. So the new habit is
Yeah.
when I feel triggered, instead of screaming at the person I want to scream at, I take a breath and walk away. Or I say something that communicates my actual needs in a clear, confident way.
Yeah. And it's not about eliminating like the second necessarily eliminating those secondary losses because even right, I've been working on this and even still, and I feel like because that loser narrative is really a part of who I am, it's part of my story, it's part of what makes me who I am today. It's still there and I can choose to listen to it or not. So there are days where the other day specifically, I was in bed and I'm like, oh man, I need a little extra rest. Now the champion would be like, stop being such a baby, get out of bed, get at it, let's crush it. The loser was like, let's stay in bed a little bit longer. And I took a moment to kind of tap in to see which narrative I wanted to listen to. And I made the choice to stay in bed for an extra 45 minutes to an hour because I wanted that rest. And even though I could have gotten up, I chose to listen to that loser's narrative of myself and really honor and not just and look at it with love and compassion because I could have fought against it, but I didn't want to at that point. Sometimes you have to give in to those things. Like, and same thing with eating. Like we could get too rigid about those kinds of things, but having that softness and that compassion and that ease and that gentleness is so important, especially with grief and with any challenge in life, not just grief.
So, why do you think it's so hard for us to see the secondary losses? Maybe see isn't the right word because
Mm.
sometimes we know we've lost our housing, we've lost our income, we've lost our role. We know that.
Yeah.
But we don't always, and I'm saying we as humans, we don't always acknowledge these as losses in a
Mhm.
way that we do with a death. A death loss, we tend to say, oh my gosh, this has happened. Everything has changed. I need to tend to it. I care about this person. I want to still remember them. I still want to think about them. And then when we lose a house, like let's say after a divorce, and
Yeah.
we're missing that house, we're mourning that house, but we're just like, I just have to power through this. I just have to get over
Yeah.
it. It's just a house. It's
Mhm.
just my role. It's just my income. It's just a name. It's just, tend to minimize these things.
Yeah, I think the mind looks for a confirm like we were talking about that confirmation of what it thinks to be true. And I know for me, it was like, oh, the death of my sister caused me certain things, and so that's where I put the blame because
Mm,
that's what my mind believed to be the blame of things. And it's like chasing symptoms versus looking at root causes. When we chase symptoms, we're trying to put band-aids on things, but when we find those like kind of root causes, then it's like, oh, we can really heal from that and we can grow from that. And so I think our mind, you know I think over time we do, or many of us start to recognize the secondary losses, but we put so much stock in the primary cause of the loss that we don't actually get a chance to really look at that. And all of the stuff that's going wrong in our lives, we blame on the initial impact of it because it's like that's the symptom of it, right? But then we look at those root causes and we see the cascade effect that it has.
right. And also, I want to be really clear. I'm not trying to compare the death of a loved one to anything else. It's so specific and unique. Part of me wishes I'd asked that question in a different way because, like missing a human being or a warm, snuggly pet is, something that we all care about deeply, and that when it happens, it's going to be the thing that preoccupies us. So I think I'm kind of switching over to those non-death losses. And maybe after we have um, assimilated the loss into our life, because I'm not really comfortable with the word heal. You still miss your sister. I still
Yeah.
miss my uncle and my stepdad. We miss the people, right? But then we look around and we're like, my life is so different. I went through a divorce a few years ago, and I look out and I see the beautiful Potomac River because I have chosen to move here, and in some ways that's beautiful. And yet there's like this whole life I was living that isn't here anymore. You talk about the champion and the loser in you. I don't know that I have names for mine. I might want to work on that. But there's that part of me that's like that divorced woman who is like, how did I get here? Where is my life? I was heading in this other direction. And then there's this other part of me that's like, come on, sister, you need to buck up because you weren't in a good situation and now everything's better. And you should be grateful that you're more in control of your life. What about the middle ground? And that's something I think I want to really focus on, that place between the person who feels like she lost everything and the person who feels completely in control, and allow both to exist in that non-dual way and say, I miss the false sense of security that I had, even if it wasn't real. I miss that.
Well, and knowing a little bit about your story, right? Like it's almost like you're probably more secure now than you were when you were married, right? Like it's this
Absolutely.
thing, right? Like it's this thing that our mind does. But taking it back like to non-death related. So what are your secondary losses after the divorce? If you wouldn't mind naming those, right? Like because when we give a name to those things, they really lose their power over us, or
True. We were talking about that in the book launch, weren't we? About Voldemort. There,
yeah.
I said it.
Exactly.
About the Harry Potter thing, that when we give names to things, that we can then shine a light on them and address them. I mean, the role of wife for me was about nurturing someone, having somebody that I tended to and cared about. And that was definitely a loss. Homeowner was definitely a loss, even though, fair to say what you said, because my marriage ended because of financial infidelity, I'm so much more secure now than I was then. And I think the big journey for me and what's worked for me, and I've been sharing this with my clients, is learning how to take those things I'm missing. So let's say role of wife. And by the way, I have done this with people who have lost a partner to death, not just, divorce. So recognize those are different. But what we're forced to do is to kind of become our own nurturer and our own caregiver. And I have a love hate relationship with this, especially for my grieving spouses and partners and parents and all that. Like, I hate that your person isn't here to give you what you need. I hate that my marriage wasn't something else and that I couldn't get what I needed from him. But when we can start to say, how do I nurture and care for me, when we have the energy to do that, and we pour that energy of that lost role back into ourselves, or we figure out how to make our rented house feel more like a home, that's where we start to shift that identity and see real changes. One of my favorite stories from a bereaved woman. It's such a simple story, but it's so cute and beautiful and magical in a way. Heartbreaking that she lost her husband, of course, but he was the guy that took care of everything. He took care of the house, the yard, the tree limbs that needed to be cut down. And I remember one day she came into group and she's like, yeah, I was standing on a tractor with a chainsaw yesterday. I mean, we're all slightly terrified. Like, that doesn't sound safe, but that was her learning a role. And she was at a point in her grief journey where she felt empowered and strong. And yes, she missed her husband. And yes, she had a conversation with her husband while she was cutting that branch down. Look at me, honey.
Yeah.
Look at what I can do now. Bittersweet for sure.
Yeah.
But I think it's about that coming back to ourselves. She lost her handyman.
Mm.
That was a role that he played that she had to take on. That's a
Yeah.
secondary loss, is losing that person that puts the Christmas lights up, those little
Mhm.
things that aren't so little.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I just think there's, and this doesn't go into necessarily gender identity and just to be, but there is like a like masculine roles and a little bit more feminine roles. And even within myself, I tend to move towards the feminine where I can be very like loving and nurturing. And even recently, I'm working on, you know, embracing the more masculine parts of myself, like protecting and serving and providing. And so there is like, when, especially in relationships, when that gets separated, there's like, oh, now I have to kind of do both roles. And if you're not practiced on one side or the other, then it's like building a muscle. We have to practice those things. And, you know, and even though they may or may not be true, you may be completely capable. There's that thought pattern that happens that, oh, I'm missing this person, so now I got to do it. Right.
I'm only laughing because my life on that level did not change one bit because I have been the masculine and the feminine in
Yeah.
my marriage. Some people, when they have a loss like a divorce or the death of a loved one, right, they have to pick up whatever they weren't doing.
But then it's that self-care thing that you were saying, that so it's a
Yes.
little bit harder, right? Like, and that self-care is definitely more on the feminine side. And so it's about saying, time out, masculine Heather. Let me sink into, let me be a little feminine, right? Let me be
Right.
feminine now. Let me go and get my hair done, get my makeup done. Like, let me feel pretty, right?
Oh, you have no
Yeah.
idea how badly I love feeling pretty. But yeah, I mean, I started, started doing things for myself, like taking myself to concerts. That was my big commitment when I moved out. I was like, I'm getting my music back because one
Mm,
thing I lost in my marriage was my musical autonomy. And that wasn't really his fault. That was something I let go. And so I decided to take myself to a concert date once a month and buy myself the t-shirt.
oh, that's awesome.
And, it took a few months for me to get to where I felt like doing that. But now I do that all the time. Now I have way too many concert t-shirts. But I also have these little soundtracks I do, little playlists called, it's like Heather's Chapter 2 was the first one, then Heather's Chapter 3. And I think now I'm on like Heather's Chapter 8 or 9. And so it's little sections of the adjustment to life as a single woman where
Mhm.
certain music will come on. I'll be like, that belongs on the playlist. And you can kind of listen to it. And it's like that first Heather's Chapter 2 is really angry. And like the last chapter is so like, let's go out and play. Let's have fun. Let's wander through nature. It's really interesting to watch that. That's been a really creative expression of my grief and my
Mhm.
self love and my friend love. Cause there's definitely a section where there's a lot of songs around friendship.
Mhm.
And that's when I was really reconnecting and putting energy intentionally into nurturing the bonds with my friends.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I love using music. I think that's a great tool because it just really taps into sort of that emotional part of yourself. And so even with my champion, I have a certain song, and I'm gonna say it.
Go ahead.
It's called "Roar" by Katy Perry. It's
Nice.
the right. And what I literally do, I would say maybe not every morning, but at least 3 to 4 times a week. I will play that song and I have a rebounder, which is like a little trampoline, and I literally jump up and down on it. And I just reinforce that idea that I am a champion. And even in, and I have it worked into my masculinity. And my sort of mantra is I am a champion leading my team to freedom. And so I will jump up and down with that song playing. And sometimes I'll be like singing along with it with all gusto, because when you get your body involved with that, like, just like I was saying, just saying I'm happy doesn't necessarily work. But when you include your body and get yourself like really moving and pumping, and it can literally change your emotions just like that. And that's the thing. I use music, I use physicality, and it just shifts everything.
Okay, I'm going to talk about it, the subconscious mind and identity, and why being positive doesn't work unless you bring that movement, music, or other things into it. And this comes out of my studies. First, I did it for myself, and now I'm providing it with my clients through Tice Gibson's integrated attachment theory, and the idea that all of these core wounds are stored in our subconscious mind. And this is attachment theory. We're going back to Ainsworth and Bowlby. This is, good psychology from back in the day, modernized now that we know about neuroplasticity.
Mm-hmm.
So just telling yourself something positive doesn't speak to the subconscious mind, because the subconscious mind only thinks, speaks, communicates in emotions and imagery and memories. And so when you're feeling, the thing is, when you're jumping on your trampoline, listening to the music, you are feeling like a champion. And it's that feeling that's communicating to your subconscious mind. That's where the change happens.
So I have a theory, and I think this is going to be the first time that I'm going to actually say this out loud to more than just one person, right? I've been in this habit of questioning everything, like especially presuppositions of like what we think and what we believe. And I think that we may not have a subconscious mind, but let me kind of clarify. Like, there's definitely something happening underneath, but I think it's a body, like a body memory, not a, like, not in your brain. Because like they've been trying to find, like, when we think things, they can see the electric stimulation in the, like the prefrontal cortex, and where different things light up the brain. But when it comes to what's subconscious or unconscious, there's really, the brain doesn't really light up like it does with conscious memories, right? But the body has a way, like, just like the body keeps score type of thing, where I think that those patterns are suppressed by the body as a protection mechanism. And so that when you do things like move your body, it actually stimulates the body memory and not any sort of subconscious. That's a theory I have. I'm still kind of working through some of the details of it. You know, I understand the concept. And the reason I say this is because the idea of subconscious came from Freud, who was a cocaine addict. And so, like, should we really, I mean, there is something going on there for sure, but is it, like, what is that thing? And so when we look at, a lot of times we build up theories on faulty premises. And so I'm wondering if that's one of them, possibly. I don't know. It's just something I'm playing around with. And I feel like I had to, because you said subconscious, and I'm like, oh no, it's really a body thing, not a mind thing. I felt like a good place to present my theory on that.
I am not going to debate you because I don't know the answer to that. And I also find we often approach body mind as too dualistically.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I'm not uncomfortable with the idea of body having a role in this by any
Yeah.
means. And yes, Freud had some issues. But yeah, I don't know if we can completely throw out
No,
conscious
no, for
mind,
sure.
subconscious, but you and I can
Yeah,
just evolve this conversation. But we
right.
do
Well,
know
and
from the research that when people do things to try to reprogram their subconscious mind, or for you, subconscious body, or whatever we want to
yeah,
call it, when you try to reprogram those core wounds by moving out of conscious mind and moving into feeling and emotion, that's where the changes take place.
100%. And it's not about like it doesn't, of course it exists, but the question is where, I
Where
think that's that where. And the thing is that if you think of it that way, then we can have, and we can have limiting beliefs, but we can have beliefs that limit us. And so that this way, like, like we can make any sort of changes. It gives us the hope that to be able to make the changes that we want and to know that it's possible rather than, oh, I'm stuck in my certain mindset forever.
you and I both get to see every single day that we work with clients and ourselves
Oh,
that change is possible. I mean, that's the whole idea here, moving grief, right?
yeah,
It's not static, it's not just one thing.
yeah.
And you and
100 and
I both
yeah,
really believe that the body is a big part of this, whether somebody has the physical ability to get up and move in the way that maybe most of us think of as yoga, or whether it's, sitting still and really embodying your experience. There's many ways to move grief.
100%. And everyone can move something, even if you move your fingers, like, right? Like we all can find a way of moving that serves our body in a way that is going to support us.
Well, I would have to argue not everybody can move their fingers,
What, but
but
they're like, even if they can blink their eyes, right?
yes,
Like, or
right.
like, right? Like, we, unless, right? The
I just
usual,
had to challenge you because you're challenging
no.
my subconscious mind, and it's fun. But like let's go a little more into mind body stuff for a second, just for fun.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The work that Dr. Herbert Benson did on the biology of belief, and I love Dr. Herbert Benson
Oh,
because he
love.
did relaxation response, which is a type of meditation based on transcendental meditation that can help alleviate a lot of stress related medical symptoms and emotional symptoms. And he also did research with athletes. And I actually think I remember being like 10-year-old Heather during the Olympics where the Americans beat the Russians, or maybe it was in hockey, or maybe it was 4 years later. I don't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure they had him on TV because later I read about his studies with athletes and how they could sit perfectly still, visualize their routine or their sport,
Yep.
and their brain centers would light up and they would go and perform great and all of this stuff. And so, what about if somebody, let's say, doesn't have the ability to move parts of their body? And I've worked with clients who've had fibromyalgia and just movement so painful.
Yeah, yeah.
What are some of your suggestions for moving when you can't move? This is a big, hard topic, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and you just gave the answer, right? You can visualize yourself moving, right? Like that's the answer. Because and I don't remember the exact numbers, but I know they did like the test with the athletes where one control group didn't do any practice or anything. They had one group that practiced their routine in their mind, and they had a third group that physically practiced it in their bodies. And they found that the people who just practiced the routine in their mind, I think even performed even a little bit better than the group that physically practiced it, because the mind doesn't know the difference. If you're visualizing, then your mind does not know the difference if it's happening in reality or just in your mind. And so there are many times, that even sometimes when I'm working with clients, they're so good at the visualization of it that they're like, oh yeah, I did that already. But I'm like, but you just did it here. You didn't actually put it into action. And so we need to combine the visualization and the thought patterning with the action, because if you don't have both, then it doesn't manifest in reality.
Well, and there's a big difference between saying I thought about it and it was a passing thought versus sitting down and really being with something.
Well, right, and that's there. That's the difference about thinking about happiness and feeling the happiness, right? Like when you're visualizing, you need to be fully associated in whatever vision that you're doing it. It's like you're not just thinking, oh, like going to the beach would be nice. That's great, but then it's like closing your eyes and then taking a couple of deep breaths and seeing yourself on the beach, hearing the waves, getting all of your five senses involved in your visualization. That to me is that's where the magic happens. That's when the brain is like, "Oh, I'm fully associated in this moment." And it's not just a thought, it's including your feelings and your body as well.
I'm wondering for you to kind of tie it all together, going back to, again, this Jason who was told he was a loser. I have a hard time
Yeah.
saying you were a loser because, like that's your experience. I honor that, but like you're
No.
just so amazing to me. But this little Jason who felt like a loser and then he loses his sister and then these other bad things happen. What was it for you that made the shift to where your mind was even open to the idea that you might not be just a loser?
Yeah, I think that that's a good question. Let me get a good answer.
Mm-hmm.
It was the awareness of how much that loser narrative controlled my life. And I knew I was available for more. I know that there's like I have infinite power, you have infinite power. Everyone has this infinite power that lives within them. And if you don't believe that, just take my belief on it, like, or take Heather's belief. Like, we're all meant to be, and in yoga, we say, oh, be the best version of yourself possible. And I realized that if I'm carrying around this loser narrative, I can't be the best version of
Mm.
myself possible. It's just counterintuitive. I can't be a winner and a loser. Like I need to figure this out. And I know that there was more for me. There's more available for me. I wanted more income and a bigger life and to have more impact, which is one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast to begin with, to reach more people. And so it's taking the next step in that direction and going kind of back to visualization, right? Knowing that I have this loser narrative kind of playing in the background. I want to transform it into this champion narrative. I now have to visualize what that means. What does being a champion mean? What does that mean to me? What is that, like, the core of what will make me that champion? And then taking those actions to move me in that direction. So that this way, if I were to say I'm going to be a champion and it means that we have a very successful podcast with millions of listeners and a business that's thriving and traveling and doing speaking gigs, because this is part of these are part of the reasons these are part of my champion story, is like I'm traveling around the world talking about grief, helping people, having private clients and group classes, and a website that's got all kinds of grief resources on it. So these are the things that will make, and knowing the outcome before it happens and seeing what that looks like and feels like. Now, when I come from it, I can either take it, when I come back to the present moment, I can either make the choices right here and now to do those things that'll move me in the champion direction, or am I doing things that are moving me in the loser direction? And so it becomes my GPS coordinates. It becomes my destination, and I have to make those left and right turns. Not to say that I'm not going to, make a wrong turn, or there's going to be a dead end street that I have to re-navigate around. It's not going to eliminate struggles or challenges, but it's going to give me better quality problems so that I can move in that direction.
Better quality problems. Love that.
No matter what we do, how present we are, life is going to throw stuff at us. And, like, I mean, in grief, it's really noticeable. Like, it becomes very clear that, especially if there's a couple of losses in a row, or, you have these secondary losses that we've been dealing with, right? It's not to say that you're not going to not have any problems. And I know even with yoga, some people think, well, if I practice yoga, I'm going to take away all the stress in my life. Well, it's only because as problems come, you have better quality problems and then have those resources to navigate them.
It's really about resilience. And
Yeah.
I want to invite in another word for fun. We have loser champion. There's also a loser gainer. And
Yeah.
while you
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
talking about that, I was thinking back to our last conversation about your sister and your
Hmm.
business
Yeah. Yeah.
and how focusing on grief as a profession has allowed you to gain a deeper connection with your sister.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that because you were talking about the secondary losses, I was thinking, what about the secondary gains too, right? Like losses
Yes,
and gains, right?
exactly.
Like secondary gains, right? Like, of course, I had the loss of the income, the loss of identity, the loss of jobs, but I also have secondary gains of courage because I would never be doing this now if Lauren hadn't passed, because I wouldn't have had the courage to step out on my own, to be bold, to do those things that I need to do to move my needle forward. I just wouldn't have had the courage. To be honest, if that didn't happen, I could easily have been that person that just works some sort of crappy 9 to 5 job for the benefits, for the this, and feeling dead inside, because I did do that for about a year before Lauren passed. Like, I was in an office in a cubicle, and every day I would go to work and I felt like I was dying a little bit inside. And it wasn't until like I realized, oh shoot, I don't know how much longer I have. So why not take those chances? Why not have the courage to go for it? And if it doesn't work out, at least I can say that I tried and I put, and I kept trying and I kept trying and not giving up. So that courage, that secondary courage, also compassion is another thing. I was quite self-centered in my young adult. It's all about me. Like, what can I do, right? And so having that secondary compassion about how can I use my skills and talents to serve others, absolutely a game changer. Time is another secondary gain for me. Like, realizing we don't have, like, time is one of our only non-renewable resources. Money comes, money goes, you can make more, you can make less, that you can always replenish that. But time, once it's gone and you can't get that back. So how am I using my time? Am I making the space for things that are important to me? Or am I just doing the things that are urgent, right? Like, that are on the day-to-day thing. And I realized that, yes, I have to do the urgent things, but I have to also do the important things as well. Like, those priorities that, if they happen today, they can be pushed off for years and years and years, right? And
Right.
so, yeah, my health is another thing too, secondary gain. Before Lauren passed, I was probably about 50 pounds overweight, and now I'm probably at the healthiest that I've ever been. I'm able to do more, and I'm pushing myself to even do a little more, like kind of getting in connection with that masculinity I mentioned earlier, really about pushing my body's limits on doing all kinds of challenging things. So,
I challenge you to a deadlift competition.
ooh, okay, let's do it.
That's my new thing for weight training. Um, you just listed out a lot of really good things for us to be aware of. Time,
Yeah.
health, dare I say, loving what you do,
Oh,
loving
passion.
who you're
Yeah.
surrounded by. And it
Mm,
reminds me of when my stepfather, Tom, died, and he died suddenly after surgery. And I was in a relationship at the time, this was prior to getting married, where, I don't think either of us were satisfied with that. It was fine. It was good enough. It had some good points. Didn't really even have any bad points, but it was Tom's death, sudden death, that woke me up again because I had forgotten the lesson of the fragility of life.
mhm.
This goes back to that idea of right timing that you and I always talk about. And, talking about gains, if you've just lost someone you love, might just feel ridiculous that we're even bringing it up. I get that because right after he died, I wouldn't have been comfortable with that
No.
conversation.
Mm,
But about 6 months after, actually, no, it was longer than that. Maybe it was probably a little over a year after I ended the relationship with the person I was with, not for any particular thing that happened right then, other than I just was like, this isn't me living my best life, my fullest life. It's not fair to this other person either.
mm,
And while that was in a way a secondary loss, it was also a secondary gain
mhm.
because I lost a relationship that I'd been in for 13 years, and I'd lost faith in the relationship. Maybe that's part of it too, was the losing faith in it.
Mm.
But it was one more step closer to wanting to live that precious life. Now, I'm not saying I made the best choice after that because obviously, wound up divorced, but it still is this progression, right, that I'm going through in this life of, it's not like we're going to come right out of the gate and nail it and get it perfect. You even said you're working on your stuff, I'm working on my stuff. It
Yeah.
is a constant evolution and recalibrating. And you said, like, your problems become better problems,
Mm.
your resilience becomes stronger because you've
Yep.
been through the most unthinkable thing. The next thing might be hard, but might not be as hard. And you can get through it. And I know nobody who's grieving chooses to be strong. We don't choose
Yeah.
to,
Right.
we are forced into it. But being forced into it gives us the strength and the power, the resilience and the confidence to keep going when things
Yep.
get tough.
Yeah, and I think if also like to sort of change to see, first of all, acknowledge what the narrative has been through your life. Like, so I know you were talking about like it started sort of with the wife, like being a wife as a part of your identity, but like even taking a look back, and this is where I love to use the past as information in the present, where rather than going back and digging down into the past and pulling up all the dead bodies and skeletons that are right, like, but visiting the past just to see what your patterns are. So like if like for you mentioned what being of the wife, right? And then just kind of going back and looking like what have been your models of relationships, and looking at your own, how your own parents interacted, and how you how we've all been conditioned, and it shows up in the present moment, but it's been conditioned by a whole big broad paint strokes of our past. And so just taking a moment, if you to find your own narrative, just kind of scan your past. And as I said, don't go and live there. Just like look at the repetitive patterns and the repetitive messages that you've been given, and you'll usually find, if you take the time to do that, you'll find that thread. That's how I realized the loser part of myself. Now, granted, that's me, the way I see myself. It has nothing to do with anybody else. And I don't blame the kids in my grammar school for picking on me. I don't blame, like, I'm not blaming them, but I am acknowledging that their behavior had an impact on me and how I process that information, because we each have different ways of processing those patterns.
And it ultimately becomes about seeing yourself through your own eyes. And I like what you said about going back and looking at the patterns, not living there. And that makes me think of, the anthropologist who goes back and digs things up, is like, okay, well, this is similar to this. And we almost have to become our own detached observers to really get clear
Yeah.
on the patterns. Because when you dive into the feels, you sometimes
Oh,
can't see the forest for the trees. So I'm wondering, do you have a practice you want to share? And I know I'm putting you on the spot with this, but I
yeah.
I love that you brought that up. How do you look at your life with that compassionate but somewhat not detached, objective is the word I'm looking for, objective perspective?
Well, and it's also a kind of a dissociation a little bit, right? Like, because as we talk about with the visualization, you want to be fully associated to that thing, right? Like with looking at the past, you do want to be a little not disconnected, but more of an objective observer, like that witness consciousness that so many of the like meditation practitioners talk about, seeing yourself from kind of above and just going through the images of your life so that you can see those patterns. And yeah, let's do a little something right now, because we always love to give tools that you walk away with, and it usually starts, most of my tools, and I know with my clients, that when I start to say sit up tall and close your eyes, they know what's coming.
I'm prepared.
Right? Yeah, okay. So come to everyone. Well, unless you're driving a car, please don't close your eyes. But you can still sit up nice and tall. Good. And sit up nice and tall. Close your eyes. Once again, as we mentioned in the first two episodes, reconnect with your breath. And I want you to notice how your body moves with your breath. Notice your belly. Notice your chest. And then once you've really connected with your own internal breath, see if you can let the biggest part of your identity come to the surface. Like, who are you right now? If you had one word to describe yourself now, what would that be? And whatever that word is, just try to like bring into your mind's eye some of the characteristics of your identity. What makes you that person? And just take a couple of breaths and send love and appreciation to the person that you are right now. And this is all about loving and appreciating ourselves now, and all of the things and the struggles and the challenges that made us who we are. And then see if you can imagine your life as a little timeline. And I just want you to scan the timeline of your life. And I want you to notice any moments that connect with your present identity. And take it back, start with maybe 5 years ago, just scanning that timeline. And maybe taking it 10 years. And then 15. Then maybe 20, depending how on your own age, right? Start to take that timeline just as far back as you can remember. Because this person that you are right now is an accumulation of all of those experiences from the time you can remember up until this moment. And notice that thread. And just take a few moments just to be grateful for all of those experiences in whatever way shows up for you. Maybe it's not gratitude, maybe it's acceptance. Maybe it's peace, maybe it's forgiveness, whatever feels right for you. And then just sit with it just for a moment or two. All of the primary losses, all of the secondary losses, all of the primary gains and the secondary gains, they're all part of you. Integrating them into who you are and who you will become. So then start to bring your awareness forward on that timeline. Maybe a few years at a time. Until eventually you bring that into this moment, into this present moment right here and now. And the person that you are now, and as you inhale, just say to yourself, I am. And as you exhale, that I am. And this is the hamsa. So if you want the Sanskrit, as you inhale, hum, exhale, sa. I am that I am. Accepting yourself exactly as you are right here and now. Hum, sa. I am that I am. Bring your hands into, just if it feels comfortable, bring your hands into prayer position. And I want you to take your thumbs right to your chest, right to your heart center. And as you deepen your breath and feeling the chest move, send that love and acceptance to yourself. And let that love and acceptance for yourself radiate out into everything that you do. And then when it feels appropriate, you can just let your hands rest on your lap and then slowly start to crack open your eyes just to bring in the world around you.
That was a beautiful, beautiful practice, Jason.
Yeah, I love, like, as I said, going back to the past just as a reminder. Like we always forget, sometimes the past gets a bad rap as well. Like, oh, all of that, right? All of that, the struggles and the challenges that we go, but they're really a gift. They're really a gift, right? Like they really can be a gift. And I know there's, that balance, but really connecting with that, because it really makes you who we are. Like all of that, that problem solving. And when we can have that gratitude for that, I think it's remarkable.
What I got out of that practice going back from from where I am now, and the word that came to me when you asked, like, who are you right now? And the word surprised me. It was competent.
Ah,
And not like competent and like, she's competent. It's like, no, I'm like kicking butt and taking names right now. And I went back and back and back and back. And what's so funny is I realized I've been competent all the time, but I've been
Mm.
believing other people's
Yeah,
narratives.
yeah.
And there's a little bit of sadness in there, but there's also a lot of amusement
Mm,
around like the fact that I've been fine the whole time. I just didn't know it,
mm,
but I know it now. And that's how I'm able to look back at that. And it doesn't take away the hurt and the pain that I've been through. And I wish many things that have happened didn't happen for sure. But it is a reframing to
mm.
where I can see myself as more resilient now than
Yeah.
maybe I saw myself before.
And I want to get that's a beautiful warning too, because when you start to change your identity, the people around you don't want that to happen, because when you change who you are, it also challenges how they see you. And they're going to try to pull you back into that old identity. So so for you with that that competent, I am competent, right? The more you step into that, the more people are going to want you, like the people that have seen you and been part of that incompetent narrative will try to pull you back into that. So notice that as you step into that, other people will, because they can only see you, like they don't see you how things are, but they see you how they remember you to be. And so those people try. It's very common that once you try to step into new identities, that there'll be still a little grip on the old identity, and people will try to pull you back.
Unfortunately for me, I've already done the work on that and don't have those people who could not adapt to who I am now in my life
Right.
anymore. And maybe
But
we'll talk about that on another
like,
podcast.
yes, that's a good topic,
Like I
right?
am now surrounded by everybody in my life is somebody who accepts me as competent Heather.
Yeah. And you notice how your mind, like now, as soon as you acknowledge yourself as competent, you are able to see all of those confirmation biases, right? Like all these things that were happening. Not to say, things didn't happen, like the sadness wasn't there, like that's there too. But where our mind focuses, that's where we attract the energy. And so we want to keep moving in that, like in that direction of let's see where we need to grow. Let's see where we need to kind of expand.
So I want to follow your practice with my practice, which I
Awesome.
know this will shock and surprise you. It's going to flow right off of your practice. And I'll put a link in the description to my article on how to do this. And once again, it's going to be something with paper. so like, I am the grief journal person. I love expressive arts. So it's kind of been really lovely that you've led the first embodied practice. And then I'm like, oh, I have an expressive arts or journaling exercise for
Well,
this.
and it's
So
funny. I said to myself, I'm going to let Heather lead this one because ours always goes upset. And I made a conscious, but it just didn't happen.
maybe it's not supposed to happen. And
It's all good.
so this is called charting your grief and growth timeline.
Hmm.
And you basically take a piece of paper, and if you can get like a big piece of paper, that's extra helpful. You can do it on an 8.5 by 11, but you might want to tape a few together depending on how old you are and how much grief and growth you've had for sure. A poster board would be wonderful. And you basically draw a line that represents your life from birth until now. So this might be something you revisit every year. And you make little marks for every decade. And if you want, you can make marks for every 5 years so that you have your age mapped out. And first, you go through and you mark any of the losses you've experienced. Maybe first you go through and you put the deaths that you have experienced, human and animal. Then you can go through and you mark the non-death losses and you label them. So you're naming them. But then you go through and you mark the growth periods in your life, getting a degree, changing careers, finding a new relationship, buying your first house, deciding you want to get that certification in something that is you're passionate about, deciding you want to get your health back, anything. And you can see this beautiful life unfolding. And again, I want to reiterate, we're never saying we want to lose anything in our lives, but we're inviting you to open up when you're ready, right timing, and seeing the bigger picture so that you can appreciate where you've come from.
Yeah. Well, and when you see the bigger picture, it also expands your identity, realizing that you're not just that one thing, right? Like, and my loss was part of my like larger identity. And then when I noticed that, then I have the choice then to change it to something different.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing your story with us, Jason.
Awesome. No, I as soon as you mentioned the topic, I'm like, oh, I can talk. I can talk alone on this for 2 hours probably.
Well, we're like well over time at this
I
point.
know. Yeah, we gotta wrap it.
People are like, okay, we love you, but enough.
We'll watch this in 2 parts, right?
Yes. Yes. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you,
All right,
everybody.